Welcome back. Let's go ahead and create our controller for Hello button. While we're here, we're just going to take a quick peek into some of the other files. Really not much here. So Gradle scripts are things that we use to build our app. The defaults are going to work fine for our first few apps here. We've taken a look at some of the values, so colors and strings, for instance. Map and drawables are used for various graphic resources that we want to show on our screen, like icons and so on. We've looked at layout. Within here, Java is it's the Java folder even when I'm creating Kotlin code. So I'm going to do that next. And one last thing here is that we have something called an Android manifest that's going to be handy when we want to navigate between different screens or if we have to give some permissions and so on. So we'll revisit that later in the class. Just want to let you know we're not blowing off those other things. We just don't really need them yet. So we're going to go back into main activity. And so far, all that we've done, like we said, is just get things to show up. So if I click my button here to run the app, I click run, it's going to look to see if I have any devices connected or if I have any emulators running. So I'm going to go ahead and start up one of these that I've created in the past. And we can actually see this, that I was playing around with the Hello button app earlier. So this is what it's going to look like when it's done. But it actually isn't the current app because it still says that it's running here. So we're going to let that Gradle build go for a little bit, and when it finishes, we'll check out what we have. All right, so it finished, and like we would expect, it says press me with no response, and it says you click the button 0 times. All right, so we want to be able to control this app. So the interaction in our app is what we call the controller, and we're going to start off by building it up small here in main activity. The main thing that I want to have happen is if I click the button, I want to increment a counter, and then I want to get it to display here. So the first thing is, how do I do button clicks? All right, so in here and on create, I want to establish a listener, and the way that I do that is I refer to my widget. Now what we're going to find out later is that I can refer to strings and so on, like by doing like get string or so on. But widgets are really convenient in Kotlin if we've given it an ID. So here I see that button has an ID called button. Then I can refer to it in my code by that ID. So if I start typing in the name button here, it'll ask me whether I want to use button from activitymain.xml. So I'll go ahead and choose that, and it will put in a special import here that sort of ties the code and the XML together. And then what I'm going to do is set what's known as an Onclicklistener, right? Because I'm waiting for the click. And Kotlin is going to allow me to put an anonymous listener here, so I don't have to define a whole other class specifically. I can just put in kind of like a lambda function here. All right, so it's one that takes a view, and if I want to refer to these parameters, I can hit Control Space, and it should give me yeah, there we go. So an option of giving just the name or the name and its type. Now it turns out that I really don't need either here, so I can omit the two of them. In fact, if I were going to put it here like that, then it would start highlighting it and say, hey, you never used it. You could rename it to an underscore. That's great. And then it's like, hey, it's redundant. You don't need it. So you can actually even kill the whole thing here, and it will stub in what it is. So what do I want to do? I really want to update the view. So I'm going to write a little helper function to do this. And again, this app is tiny. It doesn't really need a function, but just for fun, I'm going to put it here, and this is going to be a private function called update view. It takes no parameters, has no return. And what is update view going to do? Well, it needs to increment that counter, right? Well, actually, I probably want to increment the counter here. Well, what counter? The single counter is what we call the model for our app. It's the data that we care about. For more complex models, we stick them in their own class. For something this simple, it's just an instance variable. So I here am going to have a private var in Kotlin, so a variable that is called, we'll say numclicks, and I'm going to initialize it to 0. And when I give it an initial value and can infer the type from it, I don't need to specify the type otherwise. So it knows that 0 is an int, so it knows that numclicks is also an int. So I will come back in here, and I'll say that numclicks is going to be incremented, and then I'm going to update the view. All right, very good. Well, all right, so let's see. Update the view. Well, what do we mean here? Well, we're going to have to change the text on the text that's in activity main. Now here's my text view, and I see that I've not yet put an ID on this. So that's going to be the first thing that I'm going to want to do is add an ID to it so I can refer to it in my code. So I'm going to start typing in the word ID. So it'll ask Android ID. If I hit enter, it'll ask, do you want to prefix it with this @ ID? So in other words, make a new ID. Yes, I do. And then give it a name. So my ID, it's the only text view in my app. So I'm just going to call it text view. Now when given my preference, I will usually use underscores in my tag names here to be consistent with what we have. Colors are a little bit different. It starts off by making them camel case, and I'm probably too lazy to change them. But anyway, yeah, so that's going to be my text view. So I'm going to come back into main activity, and I'm going to type in text view. And it also, even though it's not quite consistent with the rest of my naming convention here, it is a signal to me that it actually is a widget that came from XML. So that's how I differentiate it. You can use a different scheme if you like. So text view dot, and I can change its text directly, and you'll see it actually is from a getter and setter. So text equals, and I could say something like you clicked the button, and then I'll show you something that's kind of neat here. So if I use the $, and then num_clicks times, then it will just use that directly. Now it doesn't like that because it's hard-coded, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and run my app again and see what we get. Okay, it ran. Let's check. So I have press me, I click it, and now it says you click the button 1 times. It's a little bit annoying, but there we go, 2 times, 3 times, and so on. All right, very good. So it's working. All right, so our first interactive app is done. There's more to do. Come back next time and we'll add some new interesting resources to it. Thanks.